The construction industry not only represents 30 to 40% of the greenhouse gases, but it also just represents a lot of the stuff that we're figuring out what to do with. It just ends up in landfills. The majority of things we have in a landfill is construction debris. It's either the waste product that comes from building something or the waste product of tearing it down. And so the construction industry, like you said, not only represents 30 to 40% of the greenhouse gases, but it also just represents a lot of the stuff that we're figuring out what to do with. It just ends up in landfills. So I think if you can even make a single digit impact in the efficiency of building or reusing this material, it has a massive impact in the amount of stuff that we're just kind of tossing away and having to store, or the amount of energy that we need to run society.
Yeah, I always see that outside of like construction areas where they got the big bins, right? It all just gets thrown in there, and I'm assuming no one's sifting through that. It's just a hot mess in there. They just end up throwing a lot of it away.
Which is part of the challenge. Because you have so many different materials that are mixed together, and there's not a clean way of separating it. So, the steel could be used to some extent. The concrete could be reused, but once you've mixed it all, that you have concrete mixed with rebar and insulation, it ends up being more complicated, more costly, and more environmentally damaging to try to separate all those materials. And so aside from like pulling out copper and a few of the more expensive metals, it all ends up just getting thrown into a landfill.
That's rough. Interesting stat. I back in the early days of OfferUp, I was curious. I was doing some homework and I found that our homes were about 30% larger than the 1950s, but we're actually having less children. So we just started building bigger and bigger homes to store more and more stuff. And I think also we move a lot more. I think the last time I looked, it's like 7 times or 11 times, somewhere in that range in a lifetime. So you think about all those changes and the impacts of that, it really adds up, and I think takes its toll on the environment.
I couldn't agree more. I think I heard a statistic that the average American is like 300,000 things in their house. You just think about like a simple thing that we could do. It's like we have, 17 million vacant housing units in the US that are just sitting there. And it's like, does your grandmother need to live in the 6-bedroom house that like she raised her kids in? If people were if we had more kind of flexibility of people right sizing the environment they need to live in, we could actually extend the current housing stock we have for a long time. But we end up having to build and build and build and build because, people get comfortable living in their big house. They needed it when they had 6 kids, but it is, unnecessary, not to mention costly, when people just decide to live way in excess of what their need is.
Yeah. Well, and if your house is too big, you don't even get to see your kids. I always say that. I even, have to yell for the kids sometimes. But if your house is too big, you don't even, know where they are. But that is a kind of crazy stat, how much vacant housing we actually have, out there. And I see that, by the way, in my neighborhood. Even both folks on both sides of me are retired, but they don't need a house that size. And so that's clearly a big challenge there.